Well, what a week we've had in politics, and there's been a huge amount of debate about energy this week and climate, and that's been refreshing in a sense because we haven't been talking about the sordid things that have been tending to go on in Canberra. And first I wanted to focus on something that the Prime Minister has flagged in his virtual summit telephone hookup with Prime Minister Boris Johnson from the UK, President Xi Jinping from China, Vladimir Putin from Russia, and of course the host of that summit, US President Joe Biden. They've all been talking about their new climate targets. Prime Minister Morrison a little bit more circumspect about exactly when he thinks they'll get to a net zero result. The other countries have all polled in and said we'll get there by 2050, the large economies that is. China says they'll get there by 2060. I think as Wayne Phillips said on the morning show earlier in the week, got to take what China says in that context with a grain of salt. But on that topic of the Prime Minister being a little bit circumspect about exactly when we might get to a net zero outcome, that seems to mirror the comments that have come from one of his MPs in our broadcast area, the seat of Grey. Here's some comments from Rowan Ramsey MP, and he's talking about hydrogen technology.
Is that I think the technology is developing and developing quickly, but people who try and put timelines on, we're going to be there in 5 years' time, I tell people just to remember the money the taxpayers include invested in hot rock technology. And 10 years, 12 years ago, everybody was talking about hot rocks and we were going to run the whole of Australia on hot rocks.
Yep.
But it didn't happen. The costs were prohibitive in the end. I'm more confident about this. But one thing is if you don't invest in it and give it a red-hot go, you're not going to find out.
So the hot rocks that Mr. Ramsey's referring to there is the geothermal technology that was touted within the last 10 years for South Australia, the concept that there was an opportunity to pump water down deep into the earth and that would get heated up by the hot rocks that are further down in the earth and that would come out as steam, power a turbine and voila, you've got energy. But one of the impediments they discovered with geothermal was that the opportunities to create it was so far out in the outback that you needed a huge transmission line and the capabilities to actually send that energy to where it was needed down around the metropolitan areas. But Mr. Ramsey's comments are a little confusing in a sense because he was also touting how wonderful it was that the regional city of Whyalla was going to get one of these hydrogen hubs. So there's all this excitement and massive amounts of money being spent on hydrogen. But as Mr. Ramsey points out, well, we down this path before when we had geothermal or hot rocks as he called it. Well, let's have a listen to what former Resources Minister Matt Canavan, now a backbencher for the Nationals in the Senate for Queensland. I caught up with him yesterday and here's what he had to say about the possibilities with hydrogen.
Hydrogen has been spoken about for decades as a potential alternative to coking coal and other energy fuels, and it hasn't come off. There are a lot of challenges to make hydrogen work. And I can't sit here and say, yep, I 100% for sure that in 10, 15, whatever years' time, we're going to be using hydrogen steel or hydrogen for transport, etc. I don't know. And getting back to the other central point I've made here, the risks we face right now with conflict potentially the next 10 years over Taiwan or other Chinese aggression in our region, we've got to be a bit careful we don't put all our eggs in the basket of things that may work. Because if they don't come off, the cost of them not coming off could be absolutely dire for our nation and our national security.
Now, to be fair, Senator Canavan is a strong advocate for coal, and also he and a number of others in the Nationals party room in the Senate are pushing for nuclear to be considered as an option as well, which would be an interesting proposition, even for an electorate like Mr. Ramsey's in Grey, which has plenty of uranium that could be used to generate nuclear energy. But what Senator Canavan has adverted to there is the national security risk that Australia, A, might not be able to create an industrial base in the event of a major military conflict, but also that it can source its own materials at a reliable cost if, say, shipping routes or freight is not able to get to Australia because of an armed conflict. I'm going to touch on that a bit further in our next hour, looking at China and national security. But it's a really interesting topic and maybe something we shouldn't muck around with if we are going to undermine that industrial base and our national security.